China secures the African continent. The largest geopolitical victory of 2025. In what many analysts now describe as the most decisive geopolitical realignment of the decade, the People's Republic of China has successfully united 53 African countries under a broad strategic, economic, and diplomatic pact. Announced during the 2025 China-Africa Cooperation Forum in Changsha, this agreement is not simply a trade initiative. It is a foundational reordering of global power that cements China's dominance across Africa and signals a new phase in the Global South's emergence. This dramatic development was formalized in what is now being called the Changsha Declaration, a wide-ranging consensus that frames Africa's future increasingly within the orbit of Beijing's influence. The only African state not participating remains Eswatini, due to its continued recognition of Taiwan. A zero-tariff economic pact. At the core of the agreement is China's landmark decision to remove 100% of import tariffs on goods from all 53 participating African nations. This policy applies to all tariff lines, an unprecedented move that extends beyond standard trade liberalization. Chinese officials described it as a full access guarantee that will allow African exporters to compete on equal terms in one of the world's largest consumer markets. For the first time, both high and low-income African states will be able to send agricultural products, manufactured goods, textiles, rare minerals, and processed materials into China without customs barriers. From Kenyan tea to South African machinery and Congolese cobalt, the implications are massive for intra-African development and for boosting foreign exchange inflows. Strategic shift from trade to alliance. However, the Changsha Declaration is not just about trade. It marks a formal transition in the language and vision of the China-Africa partnership. Chinese President Xi Jinping referred to this new framework as an all-weather strategic alignment, echoing the phrasing previously reserved for Beijing's closest allies, such as Pakistan and Russia. The text of the declaration outlines commitments to political non-interference, shared global governance, infrastructure cooperation, and technology transfer. It emphasizes South-South solidarity and accuses Western nations, without naming them directly, of imposing neo-colonial development conditions, unfair trade barriers, and selective diplomacy. With this declaration, Africa has officially embraced China as its primary global partner for development, underscoring a decisive move away from historical ties with Europe and the United States. The numbers behind the power. This is not mere rhetoric. The economic figures backing this agreement are staggering. China pledged $51 billion in new financing between 2025 to 2027, earmarked for infrastructure, energy, digital technology, education, and agriculture. Over $267 billion in trade already took place between China and Africa in 2024, and this is expected to exceed $250 billion by 2026 under the new policy. More than 20,000 scholarships and 35,000 technical training placements will be offered to African youth and civil servants through Chinese universities and institutes. 400 new cooperative projects were announced in vocational training, e-commerce, clean energy, and satellite systems. Notably, China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, has now evolved to include domestic African funding mechanisms, signaling that Africa will not just be a recipient of Chinese aid, but a co-financier in selected projects. A continental bloc emerges. What makes this deal so transformative is the unified stance of the African continent. The 53 signatories agreed to coordinate positions on major global issues, including climate finance, UN reform, and digital infrastructure standards. For China, this is a diplomatic windfall. African nations together control over 1/4 of the votes in the United Nations General Assembly, with additional leverage in multilateral platforms such as the G77, Non-Aligned Movement, and the BRICS Plus alignment. As many countries in the Global South increasingly look for alternatives to Western-led institutions, this bloc formation offers China a guaranteed seat of influence across every continent. This diplomatic momentum will also bolster China's ambitions for global governance reform, especially as it pushes to reshape institutions such as the World Bank, IMF, and WTO. Benefits for Africa. While many are focusing on China's expanding power, the benefits for African countries are considerable. Analysts suggest this may be the most generous and comprehensive deal ever offered to Africa by a foreign power. Market access. Countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya will gain immediate competitive access to Chinese markets for both goods and services. Industrial diversification. The removal of tariffs helps support local African manufacturing, particularly for nations that are transitioning away from raw material exports. Job creation. The influx of Chinese investment, especially in infrastructure and SMEs, is expected to generate millions of jobs continent-wide. Technology transfer. Chinese firms have pledged to open new technology and logistics hubs in at least 20 African cities by 2027. Concerns and criticism. Despite the celebration, concerns persist. Critics worry about increasing dependence on China and a repeat of debt traps experienced under earlier phases of BRI development. Economists have flagged the persistent trade imbalance. China exports far more to Africa than it imports, and some African leaders fear that without industrial protections, their economies may be flooded with Chinese goods. Others argue that while tariffs have been removed, non-tariff barriers and compliance costs may still limit actual access. Questions have also been raised about environmental sustainability and transparency in contract awarding. Nevertheless, the consensus remains broadly supportive. The African Union praised the deal as a monumental leap towards economic sovereignty and continental unity. Several African leaders referred to China as Africa's most reliable long-term partner. U.S. and Western reaction. The United States and European Union have issued cautious responses, urging African nations to maintain diversified trade and investment strategies. Washington has also quietly approached the AU about reviving dormant trade agreements under AGOA and proposing a new transatlantic African Economic Forum. European leaders, meanwhile, are increasingly concerned about losing access to strategic African resources and infrastructure for projects. However, no Western power has yet matched the scale or cohesion of China's offer, and while many African states will continue relations with Western countries, the Changsha Declaration signifies where the center of gravity is now shifting. Looking ahead. The implications of this agreement will ripple through every major issue in global affairs, from UN voting blocs and energy policy to digital infrastructure and multilateral diplomacy. China's win in Africa is not just economic. It is strategic, ideological, and deeply symbolic. For China, this moment represents the realization of decades of patient diplomacy, soft power cultivation, and investment. For Africa, it signals an opportunity to reorient its development path on its own terms, even if it comes with new dependencies. In sum, China's unification of 53 African nations under a strategic, economic, and diplomatic umbrella is a geopolitical turning point, possibly the defining realignment of 2025. It confirms Beijing's central role in shaping the future of the global South and marks the fading of Western dominance in Africa, not through conflict, but by offering partnership on terms acceptable to African aspirations. A heartfelt light. To every soul whose hand did give, you've helped me dream, helped me live. In darkest hours your light came through, with hearts so kind, so pure, so true. Your gifts, like stars in deepest night, have steered me gently toward the light. Each coin, each word, each silent prayer, a thread of hope so rich, so rare. My eyes once dimmed now seek the skies, and slowly, clearer visions rise. Because of you, I dare to see the world again. Its grace, its plea. Your compassion's flame will not just stay with me alone. It lights the way for others wandering through despair to feel the warmth of selfless care. You've shown what love in action means, in quiet ways through giving scenes. You've built a bridge from soul to soul and made the broken feel more whole. So let this thanks rise like a song, a melody both soft and strong. May your example gently call more hearts to rise to give. To fall into the joy of lifting pain, of planting hope where none remains. Your kindness walks beside me still, a light, a love, a living will.
don't forget to hit that subscribe button to show your support.